The Necklace by Guy de Maupassant. She was one of those pretty charming young women who are sometimes born, as if by a mistake of destiny, into a family of clerks. She had no dowry, no expectations, no way of being known, understood, loved, and married by a man rich and distinguished, and she allowed herself to marry a petty clerk in the office of the Board of Education. She was simple but unhappy. She suffered incessantly, feeling herself destined for all delicacies and luxuries. She suffered from the poverty of her dwelling, from the shabby walls, the worn chairs, the faded fabrics. All these things, which another woman of her station would not even have noticed, tortured her and made her angry. The sight of the little Breton peasant who did her humble housework aroused in her despairing regrets and distracted dreams. She thought of silent antechambers hung with oriental tapestries, lit by tall bronze candelabra, and of two great footmen in knee breeches who dozed in the large armchairs, made drowsy by the oppressive warmth of the stove. She thought of long reception halls hung with ancient silk, of the dainty cabinets containing priceless curiosities, and of the little coquettish perfumed rooms made for 5 o'clock chats with most intimate friends, men famous and sought after, whose attentions all women envied and desired. When she seated herself for dinner before the round table covered with a cloth 3 days old, opposite her husband, who uncovered the soup tureen and declared with an enchanted air, "Ah, the good soup! I don't know anything better than that." She thought of dainty dinners, of shining silverware, of tapestry that peopled the walls with ancient personages and with strange birds flying in the midst of a fairy forest. And she thought of delicious dishes served on marvelous plates and of the whispered gallantries to which you listen with a sphinx-like smile while eating the pink flesh of a trout or the wings of a quail. She had no gowns, no jewels, nothing, and she loved nothing but that. She felt made for that. She would have liked so much to please, to be envied, to be charming, to be sought after. She had a rich friend, a schoolmate at the convent, whom she no longer wished to visit because she suffered so much when she returned, and she wept for whole days from chagrin, from regret, from despair, and from distress. But one evening her husband reached home with a triumphant air and holding a large envelope in his hand. "There," said he, "there is something for you." She tore the paper quickly and drew out a printed card which bore these words: "The Minister of Public Instruction and Madame Georges Ramponneau request the honor of Monsieur and Madame Loisel's company at the Palace of the Ministry on Monday evening, January 18th. Instead of being delighted, as her husband hoped, she threw the invitation on the table crossly, muttering, "What do you want me to do with that? But, my dear, I thought you would be pleased. You never go out, and this is such a fine opportunity. I had great trouble to get it. Everyone wants one. It is very select, and they are not giving many invitations to clerks. You will see the whole official world there." She looked at him with irritation and said impatiently, "And what do you want me to wear at such a ball?" He had not thought of that. He stammered, "Why, the dress you go to the theater in. It seems very nice to me." He was silent, stupefied, in dismay, at the sight of his wife weeping. Two great tears ran slowly from the corners of her eyes toward the corners of her mouth. "What's the matter? What's the matter?" he stammered. By a violent effort, she conquered her grief and replied in a calm voice while she wiped her wet cheeks, "Nothing. Only I have no dress, and consequently I cannot go to this ball. Give your invitation to some colleague whose wife is better equipped than I." He was grieved, but answered, "Let us see, Mathilde. How much would a suitable dress cost? Something that you could use on other occasions? Something very simple?" She reflected for several seconds, making her calculations and wondering also what sums she could ask without drawing an immediate refusal and a frightened exclamation from the frugal clerk. At last she answered hesitatingly, "I don't know exactly, but I think I could manage it with 400 francs. He grew a little pale, because he was laying aside just that amount to buy a gun and treat himself to a hunting trip the next summer in the plains of Nanterre, with several friends who went to shoot larks there on Sundays. But he said, "Very well, I will give you 400 francs and try to have a pretty dress." The day of the ball approached, and Madame Loisel seemed sad, uneasy, and anxious. Her dress was ready, however. Her husband said to her one evening, "What is the matter? Come, you have seemed very strange these last 3 days." And she answered, "It annoys me not to have a single piece of jewelry, not a single ornament, nothing to put on. I shall look wretched. I would almost rather not go to the party." "You might wear natural flowers," said her husband. "They're very stylish at this time of year. For 10 francs, you can get 2 or 3 magnificent roses." She was not convinced. "No, there's nothing more humiliating than to look poor among other women who are rich." "How stupid you are," her husband cried. "Go and see your friend Madame Forestier and ask her to lend you some jewels. You know her well enough for that." She uttered a cry of joy. "True, I never thought of it." The next day she went to her friend and told her of her distress. Madame Forestier went to her wardrobe, took out a large casket, brought it, opened it, and said to Madame Loisel, "Choose, my dear." She saw first some bracelets, then a pearl necklace, then a Venetian cross of gold and jewels of admirable workmanship. She tried on the ornaments before the glass, hesitated, could not make up her mind to part with them, to give them back. She kept asking, "Have you nothing else?" "Yes, yes, look further. I don't know what will please you." All at once she discovered in a black satin box a superb diamond necklace. Her heart began to beat with an immoderate desire. Her hands trembled as she took it. She fastened it around her throat, outside her high-necked dress, and stood lost in ecstasy at the sight of herself. Then she asked, hesitating, filled with anxious doubt, "Will you lend me this? Only this?" "Why, yes, certainly." She threw her arms around her friend, kissed her rapturously, then fled with her treasure. The night of the ball arrived. Madame Loisel was a great success. She was prettier than any other woman present, elegant, graceful, smiling, and full of joy. All the men looked at her, asked her name, sought to be introduced. All the cabinet officials wanted to waltz with her. She was filled with triumph and joy. She left the ball about 4 in the morning. Her husband had been half asleep in one of the little salons since midnight, with 3 other gentlemen whose wives were having a good time. He threw over her shoulders the wraps he had brought, modest wraps of common life, the poverty of which contrasted sharply with the elegance of the ball dress. She felt this and wanted to escape so that she would not be noticed by the other women, who were wrapping themselves in expensive furs. When they reached the street, they could not find a carriage, and they began to look for one, shouting after the drivers they saw passing at a distance. They walked down toward the Seine, desperate and shivering. Finally, they found one of those old, shabby carriages that are only seen in the streets of Paris after nightfall, as if they were ashamed of their poverty during the day. It took them to their door in the Rue des Martyrs, and sadly they climbed up the stairs to their small apartment. It was all over for her, and as for him, he was thinking that he must be at the office at 10. She removed the wraps from her shoulders in front of the mirror to see herself once more in all her glory. Suddenly she uttered a cry. The necklace was no longer around her neck. Her husband, already half undressed, asked, "What's the matter?" She turned toward him, panic-stricken. I have lost Madame Forestier's necklace," she said. He stood, thunderstruck. "What? How? That's impossible." They looked in the folds of her dress, in the folds of the cloak, in the pockets, everywhere. They could not find it. "Are you sure you had it when you left the ball?" he asked. "Yes, I felt it in the vestibule of the minister's house." "But if you had lost it in the street, we should have heard it fall. It must be in the carriage." "Yes, probably." "Did you get its number?" "No." "And you, didn't you notice it?" "No." They looked at each other, utterly miserable. At last, Loisel put on his clothes again. "I'll go over the whole route we took," he said, "to see if I can find it." He went out. She remained in her evening dress, without the strength to go to bed, huddled on a chair, her mind blank. Her husband returned about 7 o'clock. He had found nothing. He went to the police and to the cab companies, and he put an ad in the newspapers, offering a reward. He did everything that a man could do, everything that instinct suggested. By the end of the week, they had lost all hope, and Loisel, who had aged 5 years, said, "We must replace the necklace." The next day, they took the empty box to the jeweler whose name was inside. He consulted his books. "It was not I who sold that necklace, madame. I must have merely supplied the case." Then they went from jeweler to jeweler, searching for another necklace like the first, consulting their memories, sick with grief and anguish. In a shop on the Palais Royal, they found a string of diamonds that seemed exactly like the one they had lost. It was worth 40,000 francs. They could have it for 36,000. Loisel possessed 18,000 francs that his father had left him. He would borrow the rest. Loisel borrowed, asking for 1,000 francs from one man, 500 from another, 100 here, 60 there. He signed notes, made ruinous deals, dealt with usurers and the entire tribe of moneylenders. He compromised his entire future, risking his signature without knowing if he could ever honor it. And at last, after 10 long years of scraping and sacrifice, he had accumulated the 36,000 francs. When Madame Loisel returned the necklace to Madame Forestier, the latter said coldly, "You should have returned it sooner. I might have needed it." Madame Loisel did not tell her friend of her ordeal. Over the years that followed, Mathilde and her husband descended into poverty. They dismissed their maid, rented a garret under the roof, and endured backbreaking labor. Madame Loisel learned the rough work of the household, washing dishes, doing laundry, and bargaining with merchants. Her husband worked evenings and late into the night, copying documents to earn extra income. She grew old before her time, her hands red and coarse, her voice loud and her hair untidy. Her youthful beauty vanished, and she appeared like any other weary, impoverished woman. One Sunday, while taking a walk on the Champs-Élysées to escape her daily drudgery, she suddenly saw Madame Forestier, still young, still beautiful, and still charming. Mathilde hesitated, unsure whether to greet her, but finally she decided to speak to her. "Good morning, Jean." Madame Forestier, surprised at being addressed so familiarly by a stranger, responded hesitantly, "But, Madame, I do not know you. Do I know you?" "Yes, Jean, it's me, Mathilde." Madame Forestier gave a cry of astonishment. "Oh, my poor Mathilde, how you've changed." "Yes, I've had a hard life since we last met. Very hard. And all because of you." "Because of me? How can that be?" "Do you remember that diamond necklace you lent me to wear to the minister's ball?" "Yes, well, I lost it." "You lost it, but you returned it to me." "I replaced it with another, just like it. It's taken us 10 years to pay for it. You can imagine that wasn't easy for us who had nothing. At last it's over, and I'm glad of it." Madame Forestier stopped short. "You say you bought a diamond necklace to replace mine?" "Yes, and it took us 10 years to pay for it." Madame Forestier seized her by the hands. "Oh, my poor Mathilde, but mine was fake. It was worth at most 500 francs. And thus ends Guy de Maupassant's The Necklace, a masterful tale of irony and the cruel consequences of vanity and pride. The end.